Today, we're going to dive into the life of one of the most brilliant, complex, and ultimately tragic figures of the 20th century, J. Robert Oppenheimer. This is the man who changed the world and then had to spend the rest of his days living with what he'd done.
You've probably heard this quote before. These are the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It's a line from Hindu scripture that just popped into his head as he watched the birth of the atomic age. And really, it perfectly captures the terrifying weight of what he had just created.
So that's the big question, right? How did the guy who was celebrated for ending a world war end up disgraced, silenced, and basically a prophet that nobody listened to? It's an incredible story of triumph turned to tragedy. To really get how all that happened, you first have to understand the man himself. And J. Robert Oppenheimer was, well, let's just say he was a man of profound contradictions.
See, on one hand, he was this absolute visionary, a theoretical physicist who could inspire hundreds of the world's smartest people to follow him into the desert. But on the other hand, he was a guy totally plagued by his own anxieties and insecurities, and he'd often cover that up with this arrogant attitude that people who knew him said could be just immensely cruel.
But, there was this whole other side to him. He found this deep, almost spiritual sense of peace in the landscape of New Mexico. It was his escape, a place where all the complexities of the world just seemed to melt away. And his love for that desert would, kind of ironically, put him at the very center of history.
And that love for the desert, well, it was about to slam right into a global conflict. The world was at war, and a terrifying new scientific discovery was about to change all the rules of the game.
The timing here is just everything. In 1939, right as Germany is invading Poland, scientists figure out nuclear fission. And this wave of fear just rips through the scientific community. The question was terrifying. What if the Nazis built an atomic weapon first? That fear is what gave birth to the Manhattan Project, a top-secret, desperate race against time.
And who do they pick to lead the scientific heart of this massive undertaking? Yep, J. Robert Oppenheimer. His beloved desert became the site for the secret city of Los Alamos, where he gathered a team to go build the impossible.
Okay, so this is it. This is where the story hits its terrifying climax. 3 years of nonstop work, all of it leading to one single moment out there in the New Mexico desert. I mean, can you even imagine the tension? It's before dawn, July 16th, 1945. The final countdown begins. And at 5:29 in the morning, the gadget, as they called it, is detonated. In that one silent, blinding flash, the world changes forever.
What they saw was, well, it was this silent, terrifyingly beautiful, awesome fireball lighting up the sky. It was a kind of power humanity had never, ever seen before. It was like creating a sun right here on Earth.
And this is the other verse from the Bhagavad Gita that came to Oppenheimer's mind. It really captures that sheer, overwhelming, almost divine power of what they were witnessing. It was a scientific masterpiece and a moment of absolute dread, all at the same time.
And the power was just staggering. The scientists had guessed it might have a yield of maybe 5 to 10 kilotons of TNT. The actual explosion was closer to 25 kilotons, way beyond their most optimistic or maybe pessimistic predictions. They had succeeded, more than they could have possibly imagined. So, after the war, Oppenheimer is a hero, right? He's the father of the A-bomb. But that triumph didn't last long, because he immediately started a brand new fight, trying to contain the very power he had just let loose.
He became this really passionate voice for putting all atomic energy under international control. He naively believed that since he'd created the weapon, he could somehow convince the world's leaders to keep it in check. He thought he could manage the nuclear genie from the inside.
But the arms race was already taking off. The conversation shifted to building the hydrogen bomb. And you gotta understand, this wasn't just a bigger A-bomb. Fission, what Oppenheimer developed, splits atoms apart. Fusion smashes them together. An H-bomb was a weapon of potential genocide, thousands of times more powerful, and Oppenheimer, having seen the destroyer of worlds up close, was vehemently against it. And that opposition made him some very powerful enemies, guys like the physicist Edward Teller and the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, Lewis Strauss. They dug into his past, using his connections to communists back in the 30s as a weapon. And in 1954, after this really humiliating hearing, his security clearance was revoked. His access to the nation's secrets? Gone. He was, for all intents and purposes, silenced.
And this
This is where we get to the final, fascinating paradox of his life.
The funny thing is, by casting him out, his enemies accidentally turned him into a martyr. To the public, he wasn't a security risk. He was this brilliant, haunted man, a symbol of a scientist wrestling with his own conscience. His political ruin is actually what cemented his legend.
And what happened after he was silenced? The very thing he was afraid of. In the early 50s, the U.S. nuclear arsenal was in the hundreds. With his cautionary voice removed from the halls of power, well, the floodgates opened. At the peak of the Cold War, the world's nuclear arsenal grew to over 70,000 weapons. Just let that sink in.
So in the end, we're left with this question. Was he some kind of modern Prometheus who got punished for giving humanity a dangerous new fire? Or is his story a timeless warning about what happens when our genius gets way ahead of our wisdom? Honestly, it's a question we are still grappling with today.